Okay, let's get started. To follow along, use the files in the folder 00-starting. I will be using the files in the folder 01 in this lesson, but you will find the finished files in that folder, so you need to use 00 if you want to follow along with me. Okay, so let's have a look at the files that we will be starting with. We have index.html, which all it does, it includes the phaser library, sets some basic CSS, and then includes our main.js file, which is where we will place our game. Then we also have the asset folder, which contains an images folder, and in there you'll find all of the individual sprites that we'll be using in our game, such as the barrel, a block that we can use to create platforms, the gorilla, the ground, and you will also find a fire sprite sheet and a player sprite sheet, which contains all of the frames for the animations of the player and the fire. All right, so we also have a folder named JS where we have phaser and main.js. So let's go and look at main.js. We are creating a new scene here, which is called, we are giving it the label game, and it is in the variable gameScene. Then we have the basic methods of the scene. The init is empty, and preload is already loading the main assets that we need. So it is loading all of the assets here, and it is also loading the sprite sheets so that they are ready for us to use. Just a quick recap regarding sprite sheets. Let's look at the player sprite sheet for a second. The frames start from 0. So frame 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Each frame, all of the frames, they have a certain width and a certain height. So I've already filled in those details here. And both of these sprite sheets, they have a margin of 1, which is basically 1 pixel. There is 1 transparent pixel all around the image. And also there is a separation of 1 pixel in between frames. After that, we've got create. We're not doing anything with create just yet. And then we are setting up the configuration of our game and initiating our game. So if you load that on Phaser and you bring up the console, you should be seeing that Phaser is being loaded and that our game is also being loaded. Our game object basically is all ready to go. So we can now begin. Phaser comes with an inbuilt physics system named Arcade. There are other physics systems as well, but we'll be concentrating in this course in Arcade, which is the simplest one of the three. It does a lot of assumptions in regards to how the different bodies are simulated so that it is easy to use and also very efficient in terms of performance. So it doesn't require that many calculations because it does make a lot of assumptions. So if you want to use this physics system, the first thing to do is to include it in our configuration object so that it becomes something explicit, and then we get access to it from within our scene. To do that, we need to add here another property called physics, and in here we're going to pass in an object. It will have a default, a property named default, which is in here we give it the name, which is arcade. And then we need to pass on some information about arcade in an object like so. You can pass in a gravity value here. You can have gravity that is negative, for example, elements going up, or you could have gravity on the x-axis, but we want some normal gravity, some pretty boring normal gravity, which is positive on the y direction, that is from top to bottom. So we will pass in y and we'll give it a value of 1000. Now this is one of those things that you try a value, and say you try a value that's too small, you're going to see as if you were on the moon, all of the elements falling very slowly. So this is a value that will give it the kind of feel to the game that we want. But feel free to experiment with other values. And if you want negative gravity, or basically elements moving up, all you do is just add a minus sign. And if you want gravity on the x-axis as well, you can add it in here, like so. Great. So there is another thing I want to add here, which is a debug property, which will give us more visual information about the physical bodies that we will be creating. And I will explain what a physical body is in just a second. After enabling physics in this way, we can now go to create and add our first sprite that will be enabled with 2D physics. So you start by creating the sprite and then you add the sprite to the physics system. That is one way of doing this, and then I'll show you another way of how this can be done. So let's start by creating the sprite, this .ground. We'll use this ground.png file that we've loaded. So this would be this.add.sprite. The position will be the middle on X, so 180. And I'll just give it some position in Y, because you will see what will happen. That should be enough to get the sprite showing. And now what we do is we access the physics plugin of the scene, the physics system, and we have this add property, and then we can add existing, and we can pass on the sprite that we created. So if I refresh the page, you will see now that the floor is falling down, which might not be exactly what we wanted. Now, something to mention here, something to point out, is that you will see a green arrow and you will also see a pink border in this sprite here. It is very quick, so it's a little bit hard to see. Those things, the border and the arrow, which represents the velocity, show because we have debug true. So that helps you while you are developing your game to visualize where all of the physical bodies are and see whether the boundaries are containing the sprite correctly. We can see it one more time, just a little bit slower if we reduce the number of gravity. So you will see both the border and the green arrow. Great, so I'm gonna set this back to 1000, and now I'm going to show you what this looks like in the console, and you'll see the physical body that I was talking about. So if we expand that in our console, you will see that this is a sprite. It's a sprite as in business as usual, the usual things that we have in all of our sprites. However, if you go to body and expand on that, you'll see all of these other things that have to do with 2D physics simulation. You'll have properties such as allow gravity, which can allow us to turn gravity on or off for our sprite. There are other things such as velocity, or whether we are touching another object or whether we're being blocked by another object, and also a bunch of methods. So if you explore here where it says proto and expand on that, you'll find all of these methods that have to do with the physics system. You can change the things like friction or drag. You can set whether the sprite will collide with the world bounds, which is something that we will add to some of our sprites, and a lot of other things. So that is one way of creating sprites that are enabled with physics. Another way of doing that, which I'll show you here. So we're going to say that this is adding existing sprites to the physics system. And the other way of doing this, achieving a similar result, is by creating and adding sprites to the physics system in the same line. So you will create an object that is of type arcade sprite, but it's basically a sprite in all, like you will see as soon as I create it. So let's call it ground2, and instead of this .add.sprite, we'll do this.physics.add.sprite. And in here we are going to set some positioning for this new sprite, and I'll show you what this looks like in the console. So let's refresh our game, and you will see that it's exactly the same. And if we go and look at the console here, you'll see that this doesn't say sprite, it says arcade sprite, and it contains all of the same things that sprite contain. It also contains the body here with all of those things. So that is another way of doing that. And if we go and let's zoom out and expand on this, if we look at this proto, it has everything that a sprite has, this also has. and also it has all of the body object. Here it is. It has all of the body object as well. So that is if you want to do it in one single line of code. It's really up to you which way you find more comfortable. I feel like I prefer to do it separately, because then I'm 100% sure of what is in each one, but it achieves the exact same result. All right, well, that is all for this lesson. If you want a little bit of a challenge, I would recommend to play around with this, with what you've learned, to place a few elements here, and also to explore the properties of the body in the console. I will see you in the next video.